Hello, welcome back to another episode of Chalk Talk on Counties Connected. Today we are joined by a regular to the channel. This is the third appearance, Coach, by Coach Holtschke. Currently part of Team Free Agent. That was myself. Team Free Agent rules right now. Today we're going to talk about his pathway, his journey into coaching. A little bit of playbook, a little bit of stuff, but basically his journey and his pathway is a little bit unique. As there's certain things that happen to him that, as we'll tell, is not your everyday coaching pathway. But we'll get into it. So, first of all, Coach, welcome back to the channel.
Cheers, mate. Thank you very much.
Always good, always a pleasure to have you on. Obviously, we've been on for a long time, but it's always great for you to come on and be willing to share your story and share your stuff. So, thank you for it. Thank you for your time. And we will today talk about your coaching pathway because there'll be things in it that a lot of people resonate with because they're going through it, and there'll be certain things they're like, I didn't really expect that kind of answer. So we'll start it. A few questions, a bit of chalkboarding, and we'll go through it. So your pathway, like many players' pathway, like many coaches' pathways, Coach, it started off as you were a player, correct?
That's right. Yes. Yeah.
And how long were you playing for, Coach, before you took the coaching role?
So I started Shropshire Revolution. So I joined the Rev whilst they were going through their associate process in 2006.
Right.
So I was sort of with the typical kind of team going through the associate process. You kind of have 30, 40 guys who've never played before.
Yeah.
So I was sort of one of those. And the team at the time was coached by players who used to play for the team in Telford back in the 80s.
Yes.
So that was sort of my first sort of playing year was the associate season 2006, league season of 2007, and then 2014 was my last season. So through 7 seasons, mostly on the offensive line, a couple of seasons there at the line as well, but predominantly at the O line.
Yeah. So for those that don't know, you were actually my first hire as a coach. So you were officially the first person I ever hired as a coach, and that came about because at the time when I got promoted to offensive coordinator, you were playing our line. Obviously, I was the running back coach, and we had a lot of conversations, and we almost every practice we were together because of the positions that we were involved with. So running backs all through the line, working on stuff. So and that friendship and bond built from there. And I could, from our talks, I knew that you were looking to get into coaching as it went further down the line. So obviously, being that player coach in 2013, right? 2013, when you became a player coach, you were still playing and coaching. What was that like for you at that period of your career as a player? And then what was it like for you as a coach in your very first year? How did you feel about it? How did you handle it?
Yeah. I think that was probably one of the hardest years, to be honest, because the guys I played with on the O-line, we'd sort of played together for 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And we were all sort of teammates. We were all sort of similar ages. And then we kind of all got the other side of 30 at the same sort of time. And a couple of them drifted away from the sport. New guys came in onto the O-line. But what was difficult was that there was guys I played with for 4 or 5 years. And now all of a sudden it's like, well, they're calling me coach.
Yeah.
But my experience level was actually, in terms of playing, wasn't any more than those guys who I was playing with. So that transition was quite difficult. And then the first day that you're sort of coaching, you know, you as you say, you offered me to be sort of player coach. I was like, oh, it's really exciting, but it's like, well, I've not done this before. So whilst obviously schematically and in terms of the organisation of the practice and everything offence, you were kind of looking after and helping with when you actually get together with like the 6 or 7 guys for the first time and you're kind of trying to come up with some drills to do, it's a real different sort of mindset, and that was actually quite difficult. And sort of in the playing coach capacity as well, because I've been sort of a starter for the club for like a few years, I really found game day quite tough. Yes. Because you sort of ranked the players on the O-line. We had sort of 7 or 8 players in total. But the reality was I was probably in the top 5 in terms of that starting job. And I always found it really difficult to sort of put myself into that first starting 5. So it was just difficult, and it was just different. But I think once you adapt to the mindset, I think player coach is a really tough role, don't get me wrong, but it's once you kind of change your mindset, it does become a lot easier.
Do you think it would have been a bit different if you would have been a quarterback and you were the offensive coordinator? That would have been a different, because you see still to this day, many quarterbacks are still offensive coordinators, especially in this country and in Europe. And you do see like a lot of QBs, especially Americans, that come over and they are offensive coordinator and QB at the same time. So I'm assuming that it might be a simpler role if you've been brought over to do a job.
Yeah, I think to the OC role. I mean, obviously, my first coaching role was as O-line coach.
Yes.
So I played within that position and then became the positional coach for that position. Yeah. I think that's clearly an advantage. If I played at O-line and then my first coaching assignment was receivers coach,
yes,
I think that would actually be a lot harder. I mean, clearly you couldn't do that as a player coach, but
impossible.
I think in terms of just the nature of the quarterback position, the fact that you have to know the offense intimately in all the positions, I think it's an easier transition. I mean, that's one of the challenges I actually found when I came up to eventually become OC, which I know is leading on to the next question, but I'd only ever really played at O-line. Yeah. So the whole the rest of the offense was a little bit alien.
I mean, to go back to that point, exactly what that is. Well, you were part of an O-line that was together when I was there in like 9-10. 9-10-11 before 12. So 4 years before I got made, I'd say. But that line was really strong and was building year by year. So even though I felt on a game day, like I remember being on a sideline in certain games, that whole O-line would be together and just talking. I'm not saying you were actually like leading it, but you were just talking, and I felt like you all helped each other, even though you did the drills, you led it in a practice, but on a game day, I think you all leaned on each other, and that group, that knit, probably helped you get through that first year. If you would have been a brand new coach in a new team and not known anybody, and that might have been a bit different. I know that when I was OC at Stanwell and Carl Lewis was around, like, and he would always say, "I'm never picking myself." So if I wanted to play online, I would have to go ahead and put him in the starting lineup. Some weeks I did, some weeks I didn't. It would depend on what his feedback was. But I think that first year for you helped you because of the players that you had around you, like step up at that league. And in turn, it helped me because I was able to, because I was from the running side of an offense, like offensive running back and offensive line. So I was still learning about the pass game, not on paper, in game. So I felt more freer to just be next to Dave and we talk about pass game stuff in game while you guys were talking about how we're fixing this thing, and that's how I felt. So our pathways were different, but they were identical in some other ways. That's how I felt about it. But I think having that core around you really solidified your ability to, as you say, even though it was tough, step up to it and draw yourself to that challenge. That's how I felt about it.
Yeah, definitely. I think there's there's a respect element there from they're guys that I'm still sort of friends with now, and it's been 7 years since we all sort of played together. And they sort of, when you are a new coach, I think most people will sort of give you the benefit of the doubt. I mean, as long as you're reasonably prepared for practice, and if you turned up to practice and you're sort of making things up on the spot and what you're making up isn't particularly good, I think people's patience will wear quite thin quite quickly. But generally, if you're sort of, you turn up, you've got a number of drills run. I mean, the way we work it at the Rev, we sort of have periods of indie time broken into 15, 20 minutes, so that if you've got enough stuff to occupy the indie time, it's relevant to what you're doing in terms of install and everything that week. I think even if you're making mistakes as a new coach and cutting your teeth, people will still give you the benefit of the doubt. I think as long as you're teaching something to people, they'll give you that time.
Especially if you're being yourself and being genuine. I think
I think that's I mean, I think that's really true. I think that is true.
So you were offensive line coach in 2013. In 2014, were you line coach again?
Player coach, yeah. So
player coach again. So 2013 and 14, you were player coach. In 2015, that was your first year as a non-playing coach.
That's it. Yeah. Things started to hurt too much in 2014, and sort of wrong side of 30. So I sort of hung up the cleats at the end of the 2014 season. So 2015 was a first season, still as O-line coach, but basically non-playing O-line coach. Yeah.
So in that point from getting your first gig in 13 to hanging the cleats up at the end of 14, at what point down that coaching line, the season, well, 2 seasons, did you think to yourself, I quite fancy being an LC now. This is something that interests me. It's like I've got the book for it, the feel for it. At what point did that happen, and why did that happen, do you think?
Well, to be brutally honest, I hadn't really had that thought. I mean, we'd sort of had a season at the Wolves Wildcats in 2013, which there's a few stories from those years.
I might do a video on that. Get all the whole boy, get Adburton on the whole review. Yeah,
that's it. Yeah, and sort of I'd had kind of roles in 2014 and the start of 2015. It was almost sort of knitting together the O-line and the running backs into kind of like a bit of a run game
coordinator
thing. Yeah, it was nothing as formal as that, but it was kind of, that was sort of the area that I would, look after. So I'd run the run skelly, for example. The move up to OC came as a bit of a surprise. We were sort of 3 or 4 games into the 2015 season, and we'd been promoted that year into Div 1. We were 0-4 at the time, and I remember getting a call from the head coach at the time. This was a Thursday. We were due to play Merseyside away on the Sunday. And he basically said that the OC had sort of stepped down. There wasn't any sort of coaches on the offense. Would I do it? I was like, well, there's only one coach left on offense, and that's me. So, I was like, well, yeah, okay then. And sort of 3 days later, we were away at Merseyside, and I think we lost 68-0. So that was how I became the OC.
So, I mean, that story right there for me is mind blowing. And at the time, I was on the phone. It still blew my mind then. It blows my mind to this day. The fact that you were literally your first, I never coached O-line, and you get asked to be offensive coordinator halfway through a season. Now, that promotion in 2015, just like the usual BAFA stuff, it wasn't really warranted because you had a playoff run. Doesn't warrant you going up, in my opinion, anyway. At least they fixed that now. You have to win a bowl to get up. Whereas back then, it happened to us twice, didn't it? So
we got promoted through a restructure.
Yeah.
And it was we'd had playoff runs in 2010 and 2011. We'd gone up to Div 1 in 2012, but came down again. We competed, but with the league table, I think we still went 1-9 or 2-8. I can't remember, but we came down again anyway. 13 was a sort of a rebuild year, and 14 was kind of a continuation of that. But as it happened, we were reasonably successful in 14, but then got put up to Div 1 as part of a restructure. And to be honest, we just weren't ready at all. We'd had a reasonably good season in 14. I think we just made the playoffs, but we weren't ready for the step up into Div 1, and it just all fell apart for us in 2015. To be honest, yeah.
But my question was going to be, and it's basically you've all answered it yourself now, but because you were like just thrown into it, you didn't really have time to mentally prepare to be an offensive coordinator. I'm guessing is that it wasn't even on your radar at that point. It's like, because my question was going to be like when you're building towards being an offensive coordinator, were you at that time messing with playbooks and stuff and jotting down like that stuff, or was you still a million miles away from that point in your life?
I'd never. This is like a typical O-line answer, but as a player at the O-line, all I ever really focused on was the run responsibilities.
Yes.
The rest of the playbook, I never actually, all I needed to know was whether it was a run or a pass.
Yes.
If it was a run,
as you say, that's exactly what I think.
Yeah, I need it for a run. I needed to know the specifics of the run, but for a pass, I just needed to know what protection we were in. What the receivers were doing, I didn't know, and like, you know, when I sort of actually had to look at the playbooks, we had the game 2 days later. You know, I was looking at it. I was like, well, I don't really understand why these receivers have got letters, and I was like, well, I'm not going to remember this easily, because in the way the playbook was, it was obviously, you know, X, H. So it wasn't like the letters were in any sort of order from what I was sort of just looking at. I mean, now it's instinctive. I look at it and go, you know, but at the time I was like, well, I'm not going to remember this. I'd look at a pass play on the playbook and I'd think, well, I'm not going to know what 4 runs, you know, what these 4 people are doing on any particular pass play. So I just remember getting a load of Post-it notes and scribbling the passes down and sticking them to a piece of paper, and that was the call sheet I had for the first game.
Let's sum this up now. You are 2 years removed. Well, you're 1 year removed from playing. You've only coached for 3 years in total. You're 1 year removed from physically playing. You're 4 games in. Your OC steps down, and they're asking you to take the offense, and you have 0 experience at any aspect of offensive coordinator play. Where was your mindset at right then? Was you like actually like shitting yourself like most of us would be, or did you have to go into like survival mode? And as you say, make yourself aware, put the post-it notes around. Like, what would you do? I know that we've had many conversations. It's not about that. I mean, you had people to lean on at the time, but we can only talk to you about a certain thing. We can never go out there and do it with you because you're basically on your own. So, how did you cope with that? And how did you get yourself ready to be an OC? You literally, we'll say 2 days, but the season lasted 10 weeks, right? So I'm guessing that you literally learned to be an offensive coordinator on the job. It's what I'm being honest with.
Yeah, I mean, I guess what was quite nice was that I was under no pressure to, you know, so the remainder of that 2015 year, I was just learning about defense. And again, as an O-lineman, I'd never really given much thought as to, I understood the box. I understood four down, 3, you know, I understood what was going on there. But in terms of the safeties, I'd never been interested in it because I'd never needed to know it. So the rest of the 2015 season, I mean, there's 2 things. So myself personally, I just understood defenses and structure. So I thought, right, well, I'll understand that, because then if I can understand the structure of a defense, I'll understand where the gaps are, and then I can just call a play to go where the gap is. So that was kind of my logic. I wasn't particularly fazed by it because I thought, well, what's the worst that can happen? The worst that can happen, I go to a game and I score no points. Well, that's exactly what I start the game with. So, you know, and the where the club was at that point, it was one of those seasons where the squad wasn't particularly big. There was injuries later on, so it was a case of sort of people pulling together and coming together a little bit as well. We had a game in Edinburgh later in that season. I think we took sort of 20 people to Edinburgh and lost 85-0. You know, it's kind of one of them seasons by the end of it. But people they weren't expecting anything from you. So, you know, and they were probably grateful that you were actually doing it and stepped up. Yeah. So it was, I wouldn't say it was easy, but there was no expectation and there was no sort of
pressure. They had no one else, did they? They had no one else.
So, well, that's the other, I mean,
as you said, you know, the fear of failure wasn't there for you, was it? It's just like, I'm going to go and I was going to learn on the job.
It wasn't. And what helped as well, it was the last Rob McLean at quarterback. It was his last season, and I'm sort of good mates with Rob. But you know, there'd be situations where I'd call a play, and there was no like methodology behind me calling it. It was just like, well, what's on my sheet? I'll call this one. He'd look at me, he'd be like, oh, no, and he'd change it in the huddle. Yeah. So we kind of had that understanding that he's going to help me out a little bit.
Yeah.
So if I called, and I would have, I can't remember any specifics, but I'm absolutely sure that I've probably called, I don't know, I've probably called slants into cover 2 of cover 3 or something, you know, something completely inappropriate. And he's checked it and gone to something that's better. But I wasn't upset or put out that he did that. You know, so I think that's the mindset as well. You know, it wasn't kind of, I didn't get worried that he was overruling what I was calling. So yeah, it was just all a big, massive learning curve, to be honest.
It was.
Yeah.
Well, my next question there, it's segue, it's fantastic, is do you think that first year of just being thrown under a bus and saying, do what you want, do you think that first period, that first year's offensive coordinator, well, half a year offensive coordinator, do you think that helped you being offensive coordinator down the line? Do you think it helped your development? And if so, what do you think was the biggest impact on you from that season?
Without doubt it did, because it accelerated everything. And I mean, potentially I might not have made that jump up to OC had I not just been chucked in the deep end.
Right.
Because I don't know, some people maybe might feel it, but I don't know if I'd ever felt ready to be OC. I don't know why, but the fact that I got thrown in there, I kind of found myself in that position. You know, had I sort of been O-line coach for a couple more years, would I have actually ever stepped up to OC, or would somebody else have come in who wanted to do it and took the role? I might never have done it. So I'm pretty, you know, in hindsight, pretty grateful that it happened. My mindset with coaching, and this is the same with sort of the head coach role as well, which I stepped down at the end of last year. But I always think you want to leave that unit or that team better than when you found it. So when I became in charge of the offense, I was sort of like the only offensive coach. So I mean, this wasn't going to be a particularly difficult challenge, but you know, when I left as OC to take the step up to HC, the offense I left behind had a squad. There's probably about 25 guys within that core, and there was probably 5 positional coaches within it. So the offense, I just, you know, you're like a custodian of it, aren't you? So if you leave it, it's almost like you leave it better than when you found it for the next guy. And you know, I've got the same sort of philosophy with the head coach role as well. So you know, I inherited a great team from Steve Tonks, take nothing away there, but the team I then handed over to John Angle, you know, there was like 14 positional coaches, 10 of which are non-playing. There's sort of, you know, format set up for certain training sessions for camps. Again, it was just trying to build on what Steve had done. He took it from our rebuild year. He handed over a squad to myself as HC. I wanted to add to that before I then handed it on to the next one. So that's sort of like my mindset, and that's kind of how I sort of built the offense.
One of the things that I liked about your journey and pathway is that you don't see, some of myself really, you don't see many O-line coaches become OCs, especially in this country. It's always a quarterback or a wide receiver, and that pathway seems to be the easiest to become an offensive coordinator. That's why whenever I see a running back coach who's a OC, I give them a round of applause, because it's not easy for anybody that's not around the pass game on a consistent basis to, you know, get into it and learn it. So, you know, I think that you did a heck of a job of stepping up, not only into that role, but for the position you were with. Because as you said, you know what? If you want to run the ball 50 times a game, you're golden, because you can do that part. But it's not about that. It's knowing the whole offense as an offensive coordinator. And that first year as being an RC, and not being your playbook, not being your baby, you're literally basically calling people's plays off another sheet, which you've got no idea what they are. I think that's just a fantastic job you did there, coach. It would break a lot of people, in my opinion. It would have broken a lot of men.
Yeah, I mean, it was sort of on that point. It was, you know, we were 4 games in. There's no point. Well, at that stage, I couldn't have made a better playbook if, you know, because I didn't know anything. It wasn't a case of the playbook not being very good. You know, that was never the playbook at the time. What was fundamentally sound. It was, you know, there was nothing wrong with the playbook. So I just, you know, my aim was to, right, well, I'll just take this through, because there's no point in me creating new plays just for the sake of it midway through a season. You know, we've done pre-season with this playbook. Everybody knows the terminology. Let's get to the end of the season intact as a club and as an offense. And then basically I've got 15 weeks from September, well, actually August, because we didn't make the playoffs, but I've got 15 weeks from August to the start of January to basically try and sort things out and, you know, and to implement a new playbook, which is what we did.
Cool. Another great set. It's as if you know the questions are coming, Coach. I'm just saying, it's as if you know the questions are coming. My next question was going to be, so you take on that full-time role as offensive coordinator in 2015. 16, sorry. 15 you were in.
Partway through 15, yeah.
So
yeah.
16 will be your very first year as offensive coordinator.
Mm-hmm.
How did you find that process of, you know, making your playbook, coming up with the terminology? What was your process for that, and how did you eventually settle on what you settled on?
So where the club was at the time, 2016 was Coach Tonks became head coach. Right. So the end of 2015, the previous coach stepped down. Coach Tonks came up to head coach. He was another guy who he really only got involved in football because his son Matt was playing as a DB, and he kind of, you know, after sort of 3-4 years, found himself in the head coach position, and he'd only ever really focused on defense. There was no one else really around the club. We got through the 2015 season just. We finished that season with probably 20-25 players. So it was a complete rebuild that we needed, and there was going to be a lot of rookie guys in there. Steve rang me up and said he doesn't know anything about offense. Would I continue in the role of offensive coordinator? Which I said I would. So we had that conversation in September 15. So basically had the whole of the pre-season to kind of come up with something before we started in January. In terms of what I did, I knew we'd need something different because just the way that the 2015 season had gone, if I came back to the party with the same playbook, you know, it wouldn't have flown. So it needed to feel completely fresh and something different. In terms of what I did, I just like 2x2 as a formation. I'd obviously played under yourself, and you know, you're sort of into the air raid. Coach Reed before that, he was a spread guy, and I just like the spread formation. I like what it does. I like the fact that it spreads the field, and it forces a defense to defend the field sort of across, but also to a depth as well. You know, there's a big area for the D to defend the field. And I played in it. I was a little bit familiar with it, so I thought, well, that's going to be my base, and I kind of built off that. In terms of making it different, you know, I mean, the playbook I came with had a play in which was 4 hitches. The one before had 4 hitches. So it's not like I'm coming up with anything completely different in plays. But what I did do is I really like the no huddle. So I just watched loads of sort of videos about how people ran no huddle, just to get ideas. So I knew what I wanted to do, and I just tried to learn how to do it and then incorporate that into a playbook.
Would you say that your playbook was a reflection of your playing career to a certain extent? So that the OCs that you played under and the playbooks that you played under, they pretty much, as it should, because if you're playing it, you know it. So they basically helped you forge that pathway into creating your own playbook. So your playbook was like an amalgamation of 4 or 5 years, 8, 9 years of playing, technically. Yeah,
it was. Yeah, because what I'd learned in that off season and through the 2015 season, I'd learned about defenses, or what I tried to self-teach myself about defenses. And then I was learning about what pass plays work against what looks and what coverages, etc., etc. So naturally, I'd been learning about the spread, just because that was kind of what I was having to learn in order to get through 2015. So it never entered my mind to sort of, come up with a wing T offense, or, that was never something that sort of entered my mind, really. So in answer to that question, I'd say yes, it was just because those were the things that I was familiar with. And then I felt that, well, if I'm going to teach new players, I've got to know what I'm talking about in order to teach them. If I couldn't teach a wing T offense to somebody because I don't know it myself.
That's the way I always see it. Like you kind of build your playbook from what you've been around all your career. You're not going to go away and just teach an offense that you don't know. And if you did that, you'd be very, very, very stupid. What I like there as well is like, so your very first year as offensive coordinator, you built your playbook. How did you set the terminology before I go any further? How did you create your terminology, and what kind of things did you actually settle on? Because obviously you can settle on kitchen utensils, food. I've seen everything. So and as you talk about like the letters like H, Y, Z. Did you continue down that road, or did you make the changes that you felt necessary? Because as we've all seen, and I've done a video about it as well, is that it didn't have to be Z, X, Y. It can be anything you want it to be. But is that the way that you went? Is that the pathway you chose? And what kind of things did you come up with for your terminology ideas? Was that another scribbling session?
Yeah. So the way my mind works is I like really simple stuff. That's just what I like. So the formation that my base was 2x2. So and what I knew I wanted to do, I didn't know how to do it, but I knew I wanted to run no huddle. I don't know why that was. It was, I think, to be honest, because it felt different. And I thought that actually, if I'm going to have such a simple playbook, what I need, if it was too simple and I huddled all the time and it was too slow in its execution, it would probably be countered reasonably easy. I mean, I know we were playing in Div 2, but there are good players and good coordinators within that level. So, if it was too simple and I ran it too slowly, I was probably going to get found out. So what I thought was, well, actually, it's going to be dead simple, and I'll show it when we a little bit later. But I mean, it really is dead simple. It's almost embarrassing to show. But I thought where it will be complicated for the opposition is that we will no huddle it and we will run it quickly. And that's that was what I was banking on in terms of, well, that's how I'll make it difficult for the opposition. In terms of I was thinking about using things more simpler, like left receiver, right receiver. But actually, as I was learning about the plays and research, I was like reading the Coach Huey forums, and I was doing all this sort of stuff, watching videos. I actually understood what the lettering of the receivers was. Yeah. So when I actually came to write a playbook, I didn't need to change it because I understood where the X and the Z lines up, and I understood what the Y was doing. So I just learned it and I just carried that on. And there were some players as well. So whilst we had only sort of 20, 25 who came over from 2015 season into 2016, they were familiar with that. So I didn't want to just sort of blow it out of the water completely, because we'd be starting from even further back.
The thing that I like about that next segment is the fact that your first year OC, you've built a brand new playbook, you're stepping up and it's going to be your own, and you decide to go no huddle, just out the blue. I remember you text me, it's like, I'm going no huddle. Okay, but that worked for you. From what I remember of those 2 seasons, is that you had a lot of success doing no huddle. And you were the first girl that I knew did that, because everybody I knew, we huddle. Just because I just like to huddle. But you were the first girl that did no huddle. And from what I can gather, and what I saw at the time when I came to watch you play, it worked a treat for you.
I think it's, I I can't remember now. I went to watch the Brit Bowl. I think it was Tamworth and Blitz. And I'm sure the Blitz no huddled. And I remember sitting in Worcester. There was the year it was at the Worcester Warriors Stadium. And I was just sat there in the crowd, just watching their offense. And I was like, oh, this works in Prem. I just thought, even if I had a dead simple playbook, if I could bring that element of Premier Ball into Div 2, that was kind of what I was going to bank on being the challenge to opposition coordinators. So I was just watching. I can't remember much of the match, but I just remember watching the Blitz and how they were sort of doing their no huddle, and they were like, you know, the play calling, and I didn't copy any of it for my playbook because I didn't understand what it was they were doing, but just the process where somebody was signaling something in, it just got the sort of the juices flowed really. I thought, yeah, I'm going to try and do this. And yeah, 2016, we actually had a playoff run in 2016, which was a bit unsurprising. And then 2017, it kind of we refined it, and that was the year we won the Div 2 Bowl. We were 13-0. Yeah.
That's a heck of a bounce back from being 0-10 in 1 year to go 13-0 in 2 seasons. No.
Yeah, I think we went 6-4 or 7-3 in 2016, and then 13-0 in 17. Yeah.
It's even as you say, even though the levels lower, it's not really reflective when you got young players and young coaches. It equals itself out. So you know what? It's not like you had like a veteran team with a veteran coaches around you. You're all new to even like from the head coach down, all new to it, all learning on the job. So it's an equaliser, right? So you know you did a heck of a job. So turn that round and go from 0-10 to 13-0 in 2 seasons. I think that's quite remarkable, and that's credit to yourself and your staff and to all your players at the time. So well done. My next question would be, obviously you kind of answered it yourself, but I ask this question in every episode now. Are you a risk coach guy? Are you a signals guy? Are you a board guy? What exactly is your method of giving the players into coach?
It's just a signal. So basically, again, the going to no huddle. What I took from this Brit Bowl is I noticed that all the players were watching the coach and calling it. So that was the biggest challenge. I needed to make a playbook where the signals were quite straightforward and that everybody on the field could pick it up. It was kind of also as part of how I delivered it. What I wanted to do was teach the guys football. So I think in the previous year, so like guys at receiver, for example, they would know what. So if a play came in or got called, they would know what that play was and what to do, but they never understood why they did what they did. So as part of the sort of teaching of the playbook, kind of make like a special emphasis on why we do things. And because we kind of got into the mindset and the habit of kind of learning about the plays, the signals were it was just part of that learning process. What I tried to do as well was just package up little bits of plays in the playbook and group things together. And then what I did is I was like, right, well, what will be memorable to people who are probably new to the sport, having to learn a no-huddle offense? So the natural thing to me for the pass plays was NFL teams. So I thought, right, well, each play I've got is linked to an NFL team, and then I'll do a signal. And it was just hopefully something that everybody would know what it is. So, I mean, we had, you can't do it now, but you sort of, wings for like Falcon. We sort of, something like that for Seahawk. We had Rams, which was a symbol like that. So I just tried to make symbols or signals that would sort of fit to the NFL team names, thinking that people playing on the offense would know the NFL team and they'd be able to work out what the play was. It worked.
Yeah, it did. And do you think that going from that singling back to being a physical coordinator, do you think that the time on the job got easier the more you did it? Because the last few talks that we've had is like it seems the little guys just lacked that experience, and obviously like you were brought through abruptly. Technically, there was no bringing through. Realistically, you were starting your journey, but you were brought through. Whereas like in these times there, we always try and bring through the next man up. So do you think that learning on the job process made your life easier? Because like obviously calling the game is not easy, right? As you learned in the first year, calling the game is not easy, and you'll always hear seasoned coaches talk about, "Oh, I'm going with the gut. I'm going with the gut on this one." And I've said it to you. We've gone 4-1, and I'm going to go with the gut here. But how do you get that gut? You know, where's it come from? So it's like,
I don't actually think it's that. I mean, if you don't have a massive number of plays, I don't actually think it's that difficult, because what I found was when I was writing my own playbook, clearly I had to know this thing inside out. And when I was then watching a game or calling a game, I didn't really watch what we were doing. I was watching what the D were doing. And all I'd be thinking about was, where's the gap? Where's the space in that defense? And then it would just be like, oh, there's a space. So we had to play New Orleans. So New Orleans Saints, we were sort of, that's the symbol for. So I'd be like, oh, New Orleans would exploit that gap, so I'll just call that next. And that was, so I almost didn't think about it. I was just trying to think.
Rationalised it. You just rationalised it and broke it down into common sense.
Yeah, and because we also tried to play at tempo as well, I didn't have the time to really dwell on it. So it was like I had to call, as soon as the previous play finished, I kind of had to know what I was going to call next. So I was just trying to, but the fact that I'd written the playbook, I kind of knew what plays would exploit which gaps. I think if it was somebody else's playbook and I was trying to call the play for somebody else's playbook, I probably wouldn't know it that intimately. So I think that would be harder. But the fact that I'd sort of come up with the plays, I just knew where the gaps would probably be.
Now, you were obviously for a short period of time because you made a stupid decision to be a head coach. That's on your own fault. That's nothing to do with me. You decided to be a head coach. That's totally your own fault. But you were offensive coordinator for 2 years, 2 seasons, 2.5 seasons.
3.5, yeah, 3.5.
3.5 seasons. So it was actually quite longer than I actually initially thought. But did you come to a point, before I get to the last question, did you come to a point in time where you thought, well, I need to start bringing through some other guys now? Did you put anything in place? This is a bonus question if you don't know what's coming. That's how smart I am, right? Did you have things in place to like give people that step on the ladder? Did you have things like, because we talked about this with Paul and Adam the other day about giving guys quarters, giving guys halves. Did you have things in place like that, or was you literally still, I'm taking it all because I really am still learning on the job?
No, we had so in 2018 was our first season in Div 1.
Yep.
James Tomlinson was wide receiver coach at that point. But I'd say, do you want to? He was sort of, he was always on the radio, and he'd always come up and he'd say, well, what about this? What about that? He was one of those sort of guys. So there would be games where I just said to him, well, do you fancy calling the offense for this half, or or do you want to start the game calling the offense? So I was never particularly precious about the play calling. Admittedly, if it was a game where I thought it's going to be close, I would make sure that I was the one doing it at that point. So an example of that, I suppose, we had a game against Sandwell Steelers. There was in 2018 season, which was a very close game the whole way through. So I wouldn't have relinquished control at that point. But then, alternatively, there were games against Leicester where they trashed us, and there were games against Coventry where we sort of won quite well. So it was those opportunities where I'd sort of passed the offense over. No pressure opportunities really.
Yeah. I like that. I think we need to do more of that. I know it's something that we've done at times, but I do. I'd like to get it on camera. I know that.
Yeah, it's a difficult one because you need to do it so that it's not a complete shock if somebody then steps up and or even if there was a game where I couldn't make, because it is an amateur sport after all. So, but you need to pick the right moments, because ultimately you've got 30 guys on the defense who their expectation of the offense is that you will try and win them the game. So if you don't pick the right moment, and you know, you don't want to upset that side of the ball.
Of course.
But there's plenty of time with, you know, garbage time, even if you're getting humped or if you're winning quite comfortably, isn't there? There's always some.
Like you said, there's then no pressure on the guy who's calling it, whether you're winning or losing. It's just like, you know, take those reps and just enjoy it.
The way I did it is I didn't say anything. So because I found that what I didn't want to do was sort of just be over their shoulder.
Yeah.
So I said to JT, I was like, you know, do you fancy calling the offense this half? So he was, yeah, that's fine. And I basically just left him to it. We talk about it after the game, but I didn't say anything, and I almost took a step back from the sort of the player area as well, and just sort of wandered round. I didn't, you know, was nowhere near him, and I was there if he wanted to ask me something.
Yes.
But it was like, basically, you know, well, here's the keys.
Yeah, that's quite remarkable for such a young coach to say, you know, be prepared to hand over the. I mean, we do naturally do it when we are getting dicked or we are big, but even so, it's like for somebody who's only a third-year coach, that's quite a remarkable thing to do. I think that, you know, kudos to them, and that takes a broader scale of thinking. Takes a head coach.
Yeah, I think. Yeah, it's just the mindset, really. It's like, well, because I knew I'm not going to be an offensive coordinator for 20 or 30 years, so there's only a finite life on it. And I mean, even if you're really, really successful, I mean, for the good of the club, you know, there's probably a finite life to a stint at OC. So it was just sort of, you know, whenever I did step down or step away or step up as a case to HC, you know, I think sort of you're almost measured the season after you've gone, because if you leave a strong unit there that somebody can build on, that's kind of a job well done. I mean, if it all falls to pieces because you're not there, you know, there's obviously something not quite right.
Bless the people on there that was there when you left. Yeah, that's not where you left me, but that's a different conversation. Well, my last question, Coach, and as you know, if you've seen it, I know you have watched them. We've seen it at the Tour Talks, is we ask a coach if he wants to get up and draw something, explain something. So the question right now, the last question of the day is, what is the thing that you hang your hat on as offensive coordinator? What is your play? What is your thing, Coach?
So I know there's been a few discussions on the channel about this one. There was an interesting roundtable a few weeks ago where they they were talking about gap run schemes. But for me, it's inside zone. So, and my whole playbook is basically built off the inside zone and what I can do with it. So in terms of sort of reasons why, I mean, it's basically, if you're teaching it to people, it's one play that you have to teach. It's one scheme, and I like the fact that it's, you know, doesn't matter then what the frontage the defense put against you. If you understand your inside zone rules, it's job done. Whereas a gap scheme, depending on where the defense are lining up, your responsibility or first step as an O-lineman changes every single time potentially. Whereas that's not the case for inside zone. You know, I do understand that it is very intensive install, it's intensive training, but you know, you get a 10-week preseason at the adult level.
In most cases, that, you know, like last season, that was our only run plays inside zone and outside zone. So, you know, yes. So if you're just teaching that week in, week out, if you think that by the time you get to the season, you're going to get it right.
It's what you can build off it that I really like. It's maybe not so much the play itself. I think the play is just a really useful run. I mean, it's a run that hits either A gap and potentially the B gap on the opposite side to your running back. So it kind of hits an area. that's what I do like it. But what I used it for particularly was to build the rest of the offensive playbook off. So if I show, this is the, I'll show you this because it's no longer a secret. This is the, can you see that, Coach?
Yes, Coach. All good.
So this is the 2017 season offensive playbook. So this is the one we had, let's say it's admittedly Div 2, but this is the one we won the bowl with. So basically, so the way that I taught the offense, I needed the guys to understand, I needed them to try and be football players.
Yep.
And not just sort of take a name of a play and just execute assignment. I needed them to understand why they were doing things. The real benefit of that then is that if you've got guys who understand why they're running to certain places or why they're being asked to do certain things, if it's not quite going for you, they're more capable of contributing some decent feedback. Certainly in a game, and making tweaks. So sort of part of the playbook's about that. I told you it's a really simple playbook. So what I needed to do was try and run it with no huddle, but also at speed as well, because I felt that's where I'm probably going to get the advantage against defensive coordinators. So there's just a little bit here. We basically had multiple cadences, and we kind of had some sort of speed stuff in there as well. Formations. I had 2 formations for the whole of the season. So I had 2x2.
Yep.
One where the running back lined up on the right, and one where he lined up on the left. Yep. And I had 3x1. One where the trips was on the left, and one where the trips was on the right. Yep. Those were the 2 formations I had. So you can see how simple this thing is. A few pages. If I go down to the zone, so I basically used NFL names, or tried to, with the pass game, but the run game, what I tried to do was a name that is so sort of like name association, really. So yes. For example, the inside zone we called Indiana. And the play signal was a racing car driver, like an Indy car driver.
Yep.
So Indiana, I inside, Omaha, which was our outside play. Yep. So if I then get to the zone, sorry, I do digress. Yeah, again, just a bit in the playbook about how we ran it, basically centre blocks to strong A gap. We used zone read to keep the backside defensive end honest. If we had a 5-man box, great. We basically had we could put 5 blockers into the direction that we're gonna run to. If we had a 6-man box, well, we'd use the QB as the zone read to keep that 6th man on the backside honest. And if ever we faced us with a 7-man box, the way we taught the quarterback was to throw the RPO.
Simple but effective.
Yeah. So again, so this is, so basic sort of inside zone. So again, for the playbook, all I put in here was I told the guys they needed to know inside zone technique. So basically, the players looking at this, they had to then understand what that meant, and it just sort of helped us in the delivery of the training. Yeah. But basically, off that. So this was gun. This would be called Gun Indiana. So in terms of play calls, I'd have sort of Gun Indiana. That would be the play. Yep. Simple 2x2. On the backside, we always had a run pass option. So explain to the quarterback how to look at the coverage of the defense and throw the RPO if that's on. If it's not, that we'll hand off to the inside zone. But what I really like about it is that it forces a defense to be sort of really disciplined for a whole game, which at our level, I found that defenses can't be disciplined for a whole game because somebody somewhere will make a mistake. So we use inside zone a lot, and then we'll change it up to outside zone. So if the defense starts to, our formation doesn't change, but instead of an inside zone, we're going to call an outside zone and send the running back out here. So if the defense aren't sort of playing it properly and are maybe cheating a little bit and expecting a run inside, we're banking on our running back getting a bit of room. to run outside. We'll use outside zone for a few plays then, and then as soon as the defense start over pursuing it, we'll move it back to inside. What I then liked was, well, we were always giving defenses this look, so we were always lining up in our gun formation. So what we found was that a defense would typically put a free tech player over the, well, a D tackle over the B gap here. So they sort of played, so the free tech was always away from the running back side to try and counter the zone. So what we then did is we used a play called Patriot. So basically we would show the defense exactly the same thing. They would expect us to run zone, but all we would do is we'd just pull the play back through the backside. And the amount of touchdowns we scored off this one was it was quite interesting actually. We'd zone the whole sort of drive. We'd get to the goal line and we'd just throw in Patriot. So, it'd be like gun, Patriot. And the amount of space that was creating for us was really good. And then using the zone as well, what we did is we just built the jet sweep in, which just gave us a little bit of a motion and a jet play as well. But what I found was we could fake the jet. So we had two jets, as you can see here. So we had Army, that was a signal for Army, which was the hedge jet, and then we had Navy, which was the Y jet. And I say, using the base formation and inside zone, what we could do is almost fake the jet. So we were having plays in the end, which was sort of, it was like gun, Indiana, and then we had with Army, and that would basically fake a jet and zone it the other way, and just sort of creating space. So that's kind of why I like inside zone. I say it's not because of the play itself necessarily. It's what I could then build off it. Yeah. And then the rest of the playbook we had had a similar. So we've got our sort of Patriot play here, but runs. So we line it up. The defense thinks we're going to run zone again, but we just send it the other way. So we've got our hunt, which basically did the same thing. This is like, I don't know what this play really is. It's just some sort of bastardized version of something or other, but it worked. Had the run pass options. So one thing I always felt quite important was I needed to give a quarterback rope to hang himself, if that makes sense.
Yes, of course.
So I was always quite happy with my quarterback making a change so if I called in a play, I was always happy for him to change that play on the line of scrimmage. Sometimes it worked for me, and he would change something, and it was a lot better than what I called. Sometimes, he would call something that didn't quite work, but you just got to take that. If you give him the rope, you've got to expect him to hang himself sometimes. So we gave him a few options for the run passes, which we just use simple colours. So we've got there sort of a slant and go, hitch and go, and a screen. So there's nothing particularly.
Yeah, but
nothing.
It's effective, coach. It's effective. Do you think that mindset you had about letting the QB take the reins would have been so prevalent if it would have been anyone other than the QB you had?
I don't think so, because I think it. I think so. If they were capable of doing it, if they were confident to do it, I don't think if you had a guy who was sort of a rookie and actually needed a set of instructions, I probably wouldn't be so confident doing it, because they would probably start to doubt themselves. They probably need that guidance from the coach. Whereas if you've got a guy who's maybe played for a little bit and understands the offense, I think giving him a little bit of free rein, I think it helps establish him as a leader. And you want the quarterback to execute a play that they're confident and that they feel that they can complete. So if he's seeing something on there and he feels that he can throw a hitch, and I'm calling something that's not a hitch, but he really feels he can throw a hitch, well, why not let him throw his hitch? And if it works, he gains the confidence. If it doesn't work, you have a discussion as to why you thought you could throw a hitch, and you just work from there.
Absolutely, totally agree with that, coach. Absolutely, 100% agree with all that.
Yeah, and I say just in terms of the passes, I mean, we basically just mirrored. Sorry, going away a little bit now from the.
So good. I don't mind because I like it when people show the playbook. So as I keep telling people on Twitter, it's not tell me, show me. So,
yeah, so I mean, this was our one-step family. So we had 4 plays in the one-step family. So we had Houston Texans. I couldn't come up with anything. We changed this to Green Bay in the end, but it was just the sort of Alaska was just a shiver. Cardinal was sort of just a prayer. Las Vegas was just sort of dealing some cards. But we basically just mirrored the passes. So, if ever I was calling a sort of Houston Texans, I just make sure that the play is mirrored and just keeps it nice and easy for the quarterback. And then to go on to how we taught it. So basically explain something like Houston it's like a quick cross, and I just set out what we're looking to do, and then just the reads and the timing, so that it just helped people understand why we were doing things that we were. 4 hitches, smash. Well, 2 hitches on the outside and 2 that there's nothing particularly exciting in here, to be honest. Yeah. Yeah. So that was the extent of the playbook we had in 2017. But I mean, it worked.
Was that the same playbook that you had in 16, or was it a little bit different?
So the one in 16 was a little bit more scrappy, but because it was the first one that I put together, when I came to at the end of 16, I sort of came to refine it. I was like, oh, actually, that's not that great, and or maybe I won't do that anymore, or I'll do this instead. And you're always learning, aren't you, as an OC?
Absolutely, and that's the thing is we never stop learning. That's why we're always in meetings and Zoom stuff and doing this kind of thing, because we always like to learn. Do you think that while you're currently on hiatus, that you'd like to return to coaching at some point? And if you did, would it be in an OC role, or would you dare tread foot into a head coach role again?
I'll definitely return to coaching. I mean, that's without a shadow of a doubt. HC, I always like, if I was a HC, I'd like to concentrate on HC. I wouldn't like to be OC and HC. I know some people feel differently. To me, HC is a bit more of it probably shouldn't be, but it's a little bit more of an admin role, especially in the British League. And especially if you're not then running one of the specials, the O or the D. But it's not to say, I did enjoy the role, because when I was OC, I never really got to know the guys who played on the defense. Whereas at HC, I got to spend just as much time with the D as I did the O. So I enjoyed that side of it. And I enjoyed sort of being able to oversee the whole kind of team. But I think, to be honest, I'd rather be OC or a positional coach. I don't think there's anything quite as nice as being a positional coach, actually.
No pressure, is there? You've got your unit, and that's it. Whereas when you're offensive coordinator, there's pressure, and when you're a head coach, the lot gets stuck there with you, as I've seen happen.
Yeah, OC can be a bit lonely at times. You just gotta trust what you do, and just don't let anybody. I was going to say, don't let anybody tell you otherwise, but don't bow to pressure from people who think they know better, So
totally agree with that, coach. Totally agree with that. Well, time is coming to the end of our chat. As always, coach, it's a pleasure to have you on board. I love the fact that you've opened your playbook up. I love the fact that your journey's so remarkable compared to my journey and other people's journey. I'm sure you're not alone in what's happened to you. You're the only person that I know that got thrown in at the deep end with literally nothing at all to help him, and you turned out well for you, and your pathway has turned out to be a fantastic pathway. And in 4 or 5 short years, you've gone from positional coach to head coach. I think your journey is a remarkable story, and hopefully it will continue going along once you get past your year or 2 off. But for now, coach, I thank you for coming on. You're a good friend of mine. I appreciate it. We'll speak again soon.
Keep up the good work with the channel as well.
I'm doing my very best, coach. I am. But for now, for tonight, coach, thank you, and I will see you soon.
Okay, take care. See you.
Bye.